Asia Tech Podcast with Graham Brown and Michael Waits.
Hello and welcome to Asia Tech Podcast Stories. We're all about the stories that make the Asian tech ecosystem so exciting, so dynamic. And here to share her story with us today, we have a serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Impact Tech, Kineret Karin. She describes herself as a serial entrepreneur who's sold 2 businesses already in Singapore, so we're going to talk about that journey as well. She originally hails from Israel, relocated to Singapore a few years ago. We're going to find out a little bit more about that. Probably one of her biggest accomplishments as well, which I think we have to throw into the story because it just shows you how much of a challenge it is for somebody like her. She's also the mum of 2 teenage girls, so we're going to talk about that and being an entrepreneur and the challenges facing. We're specific to being a female entrepreneur as well. But before we go there, Kineret Karin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here. Well, there's a lot on your plate. You're very busy. We had Yoav Elgrichi on the show yesterday. You work with Yoav on Impact Tech. We talked a lot about how accelerators work. That was very insightful. So we've got a good heads up on, what an accelerator is, what you're doing in social tech as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What I'm really interested today is your story as well, because I find that quite inspiring what you've achieved, Kineret, in
Thank you.
Not just in Singapore, but where you've come from as well. So let's start at the top. I know I said, for example, that you have 2 teenage girls, so that must just keep you busy alone. But on top of that, you're also running an accelerator program, plus you have a number of different projects on the go as well. Can you give us a little bit of an insight of what your day is like?
When you say it, it sounds wow. Yeah. My day, I wake up early. I'm a morning person. I have an office. I don't have, when I read all the stories of all these big CEOs, so I don't wake up at 4, read emails. I have meetings. I need work time, so quiet time. So I have a lot of free hours that I make to myself. I come home in the afternoon. I'll be with the family, with the girls. My husband joins at one point, and then I work again in the evenings. I like the quiet times when, everybody's sleeping and I'm just working. I travel quite often, but not very long, like 3 days. That's like 3-4 days, depends where to. And I do a lot of sports, and I think that helps a lot. I like to do extreme sports. I run a lot, like long distance, and it makes me think. And then I come back home and I have all these ideas and all these things that I need to do. And so I like that.
What kind of distances do you run?
Oh, I do marathons. So
right.
Everything to marathons. So I now signed up for the Tokyo Marathon, and I'm waiting to be, because it's a draw. So I hope I will get the lucky draw. So.
Wow. It's not like you're not busy enough already. It sounds interesting that you've actually consciously designed your schedule. You haven't, as you say, you read these stories of these CEOs who wake up at 4 a.m. and they pretty much work 20 hours a day, maybe get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. But you've sort of gone the other way. You've made time to do the stuff that's important. And also in that middle of the day, you say you come home and you spend time with the family as well. That's a luxury that a lot of founders and CEOs would die for. I mean, that's sort of where they're trying to get to in their life, right? How did you go about doing that? Because I can't imagine that you're not busy. So how have you consciously made that lifestyle where you can make time for what's important for you?
That's why I'm a boss of myself, so I would have that time, because I used to. So I'm from Israel originally, but as a child I grew up. I lived in many other countries, but I'm from Israel, and we came to Singapore 9 years ago. My husband works for HP. So I had a job. I had a corporate job. I worked in a pharmaceutical company, and I hated the hours, the office hours. Hated it. Never really related to working office hours. And being a mom, I arrived at work at 6 and left at 3 every day, so I could be with the girls. So being the mom and educating is the most important thing for me, and everything is around that. So when the girls were younger, of course, I would do everything to be home, take them from a kindergarten or when they were in the young age from school. And now everything is also, need to help them. Teenagers is now it's getting hard, the school stuff. So everything is around that. That's how I sort of design my life, and this is what I'm used to. So this is how I've been working for the last 8 years since I decided to leave the corporate world and do my own thing.
Okay, we'll talk about your experience in growing and exiting businesses in Singapore in a minute. I'm just curious to know, you've got two girls. You said they were 12 and they were 14. When they look at mom and what you're doing, I'm curious because I've got an 11-year-old boy. Do they sort of show any signs of interest in being an entrepreneur? Do they have any kind of that? I'm just curious to know.
Oh, yeah, very much.
When they look at you, I mean, maybe they don't think of it as being an entrepreneur, but they just sort of see mom doing something and they say, okay, right, I can do this. What sort of things go on? I definitely see so first of all, they like to be very busy like I do. I like to be very busy, to do many things in parallel, always a sport. So I never really relax. I never really rest. I'm like my father. My father is the same thing. So I think it's something that runs in our DNA. My girls, I know they have these entrepreneurial things because they tell me things that they do in school, that they initiated, that they want to initiate, or things that they plan to do. So they have that in them, and I know that they look up to me, and I know that they're proud. So that's the most rewarding and most important thing. And I want to be a good example for my girls, although I'm like a Jewish mom, and I do want them to be a doctor and a lawyer, but you want a safe, right? Exactly.
At this point, when they grow up, I don't know, but as long as they're happy.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, how much they absorb just by looking at parents, and you don't necessarily have to sit down and tell them they need to do this or they should do this or this is a good idea. They just, as they say, the 3 rules of parenting are example, example, example. And just what you're doing sets that example for them. So let's talk about how you got into that. You moved to Singapore and you had a corporate life, but you then switched at some point to do your own thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yes. So I had a job when I came to Singapore. I worked in a pharmaceutical company, and I worked with a Singapore office. So when I came to Singapore, I already had a job, which was good. But the culture was different, and I always had that, I would say, entrepreneurial spirit in me. I always wanted to do something, but I wasn't really sure what and how to exactly start. And I'm very good in executing. So if someone tells me to do something, immediately it's done. And I'm very good in, I would say, project management to make sure everything works and perfect. But I'm not the very, I would say, idea person. I can't just wake up in the morning and say, okay, I want to do this. But I know I can. And then I'm from Israel. Yoav is from Israel. I met Yoav here in Singapore. And I started to complain that I really want to do something, but I don't know what. And he just threw this idea, and I said, oh, wow, it sounds interesting. It was a restaurant and dining portal. And I started working on that, on the restaurant and dining portal. And because in Singapore at that time, there was only one website, which was terrible. And after 2 months, the whole business model failed, and but of course I would never give up. I never give up on anything. If I have a goal, I go for it. So decided to pivot and change and do a food delivery company in Singapore. And Yoav he became my business partner because he saw that I'm not just talking, I'm really doing, and he wants to be part of this. So opened the Singapore Dine, which was running for 6 years in Singapore, food delivery, and we sold it to Food Panda, which is part of Rocket Internet. And that sort of showed me that I can do anything because I had no background in, I would say, logistics or operations or managing 40 writers and having a call center and dealing with restaurant owners and so many things that I had to do. And I was like managing practically everything. So it showed me that I can do anything. It gave me a lot of confidence. Along the way, I opened a consulting company to help people understand that they can do anything, and had started another company, which was a dating application dedicated for the Apple Watch, and also sold that about 3 years ago to a traditional dating agency here in Singapore that wanted to be more part of, I would say, technology. So that's a very high level of my journey. But when I speak to you, I understand that I always have goals. I think I stick to 95% of them. And the 5% which I don't reach, it's because I'm dependent on other parties. And sometimes I can't really overcome some obstacles. But if I have a goal, I always try and I always make it. I guess I have these things in me that not a lot of people have, but I really try to empower other people to go for it and help them and just do it and don't just wait and don't be afraid. And eventually, if you believe in yourself, you will succeed. So I try to tell that to my friends that want to do something, or to the startups that are under the accelerator, that no matter what, you can reach the sky.
Okay. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute, about, you know, what you're doing, helping other startups as well. And it's a very long journey, so there's so much that we need to talk about. Let's back up a little bit. When the whole thing started, you mentioned you had this corporate life. You met Yoav. You had this idea. You started with this idea of Singapore Dine, which started out as a portal, a food portal, because there wasn't really anything of substance in Singapore at the time. You tried that, it didn't work out, you pivoted, you then became a food delivery service.
Yes.
Before that happened, when you actually started Singapore Dine, were you still working at the time? Did you have...
Yes.
Right, okay. So how was that working? Were you doing it in your evenings, weekends, and so on?
Yeah, I was working full time and on the side. And of course, you know, during work hours, when everybody goes for lunch, you stay at work and, you know, do your things. And because I'm telling you all my secrets here, because, you know, I speak Hebrew, so it was very easy to speak on the phone with, you know, in Hebrew, so people don't understand what I'm doing. And but yeah, I always find time. Even at work, so first of all, I finish my work, and if I know I have some things, so I come earlier. I plan everything so I will have time. And if I'm working, then I'm working. And during Singapore Dine, also in terms of you know, you're bootstrapping, and then living in Singapore, it's an expensive country. I had to, you know, I would say the cash flow with my personal cash flow was a bit low, so I had to go back to work. So I was looking for a job very fast. I found a job in a very large American biotech company here in Singapore. I was working for them for a year and a half as a project manager and still running Singapore Dine in parallel. But my boss knew. He knew that I had a company. I was very upfront. I told him, and he knew about it. He was very, he previously worked with Israelis, so he respected Israeli and how we work and how we think very much. And he said he's okay as long as I do my work, then he has no problem that I have to leave here and there, or
he was cool with that.
He was very cool, but because I was very upfront from day one.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, I think there's a lot of pressure for startup founders when they start their business to jump feet first into the deep end. You know, quit their job and day one start their business. and there's no cash flow, there's no money coming in. But there's a couple of things going on in your story. The first one is the first instance you were working and then running your side project in your lunchtime and, at weekends and so on. And then, when the cash flow became a challenge, you then went back to the working world, but still continued your business. I wonder if any sort of entrepreneurs would do that, whether they think going back to the working world would be a failure with their startup. I mean, how do you advise startups now facing that situation? That they have a job, they have a safe income, they have a mortgage, they have a family, but they want to do this startup thing. What's the safest way or the best way to do this?
I always tell everybody that if they can keep their job, keep your job and work. We have 24 hours a day. So if it's very important for you, you will find the time. Work hours is 8 hours or 9 hours. And you can still keep your job, work full time, and still work on your startup. Once, of course, you raise enough money or once you feel comfortable leaving your job, then sure, go for it. But at the beginning or until you feel financially comfortable, do not leave your job. Right. It's very challenging. And and when you have a family and it's hard. For Singapore startups, a lot of the startups here are young startups in terms of age. And they get they live with their parents, they get a grant from the government, so they can work on their startup 100%. But I feel that startups or people that worked in corporate and have this overview of what it is like to work in a big company with so many stakeholders and departments and the political issues in the company, they're much more mature and I would say their road to success is much faster. When you have this overview of life and what the real life is, I think it helps a lot. The young startups in the U.S. like Snapchat or even Facebook that, they never really worked. They were very lucky, but you don't hear these stories every day. It's once in a million. So
yeah, well, if we look at the media, the kind of image of a startup founder that we see is the young guy, and it's usually always guys coming out of Stanford University,
yes,
wearing a pair of shorts, and he's 21 years old. He's he's maybe 20 years old. He's done a computer science degree, and he walks straight out of Stanford into an accelerator program, walks out of the accelerator program, gets funded. He's never worked in his life. And now he's, sitting on a $10 million, $50 million startup. So that's the kind of image in the media. But what you're saying is that, when you look around the people in your network, you find that the people who are older with more experience, and especially people who understand how corporates work, they seem to fare better in startups. They seem to have more success rate. Would you then advise a younger startup founder that they should go into the working world and get experience before they start a startup? I mean, how does that work with you?
I can tell someone go to work and work in your startup, but I think having when you work in a big place or you live in for us Israelis, we also go to the army, women also. So we're exposed for 2 or 3 years or even more to really interact with different stakeholders and do things that when you're 18 that people in the rest of the world don't really do, and it matures you really, really fast. I think that part of the maturity lacks for young startups or young people in age. So I can't send everybody to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, but I do recommend. I think it's better that you work. You can have your startup, but you also need to understand how life really works in the, I would say, working world. I feel that startups that come to us that have this experience are much more mature in the way they think, the way they interact with others, the way they plan ahead than the young ones that, they just have this startup, they just started, they say, I'm a CEO, I'm a leader, but they lack a lot of the leadership skills that come with being more mature.
Okay, let's talk about Singapore Dine again. At what point in that story did you have the confidence to quit your job and work on it full time? Did it happen in a moment, or was it a gradual thing?
No, it took a year plus.
Right.
At the beginning, I started it, and then I worked on it, and when I left my job, when it was I had to be 100%. It was going really well, and I wanted to be on top of things. I didn't want to take someone. I didn't feel that it's right to do. If I wanted to grow, if I wanted to succeed, I need to be the one in charge. So I decided to leave my comfortable and good paid job and go for it. And of course, I had to have my husband's support, and he was very supportive. Of course, he's a very corporate person, so this whole entrepreneurial world is very, he doesn't relate to it very much, but he knows me, and he was supportive, and it was a decision. And I did it. And of course, there were good months, bad months. It's a really roller coaster, a crazy roller coaster. But I think the idea is never to feel, even if I failed, like you said before, I went back to work because financially I had to overcome some obstacles. But I never looked at it as failure. I looked at it as, okay, this is something that, okay, we need to take care of this problem now. Let's take care of it and find a solution. And even if I look back and I say, oh, okay, I failed here, I failed there, but you learn from everything. So I see failure as something that you learn from, not as something bad. And this is something that we try to tell our startups all the time, because in Asia, it's failure is something, it's not good.
Right.
And for us,
it can haunt you for a lifetime as well. In some Asian countries, right? Failure follows you around.
Yes, in Singapore especially. Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And how does that work? So, I mean, you tell a really interesting story about, you have committed to Singapore Dine, and you've obviously had these conversations with your husband as well. Your husband is obviously from a corporate background. Even though he doesn't relate to it from his experience, he supports you in what he does and what you do. And you've then gone ahead and said, right, I'm going to do this. Now, you then talk about failure in Asia, because I'm sort of wondering the conversations that some Asian startup founders may have. It may be different. So it may be, why the hell do you want to go and start a startup? You have an education. You could be a doctor. You could be an accountant. You could be working for GSK or whoever it may be.
Yes.
Some really reputable company. Just go to work for them. Do your 30, 40 years and retire, and then you'll be happy. So I imagine they're kind of having those conversations, and you are very lucky because you're surrounded by people that supported you. Do you see those kind of conversations happening, and does that frustrate you? You see an Asian founder who's like, right, I really want to do this, but the people around them.
Oh, yes. But I can tell you my parents are very, my parents are a bit traditional. They don't understand this whole entrepreneur. And I always get it from them. Why don't you go back to work? Why don't you find a normal job? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But
even
they
now?
stop. Yeah, they stop. But yeah, it comes up. My mom is like, well, why do you need this? Why do you need this?
And how do you justify that to them? Do you not justify it anymore? Or you not have that conversation?
No, I just tell her, oh, mom,
You know how to deal with her, right?
Yeah, but she knows me. But yeah, for us, it's a bit different. But for Asians, it's, I try to tell them that, you need to be surrounded by people that are like you, entrepreneurs or friends or people that support you and know why you're trying to do this. But of course, it's very hard when you're not surrounded with that kind of, I would say, even the family has a lot of pressure here in Asia. They live with a family for many, many years. For us, it's different. I come from a totally different background. When we're 18, we leave the house. We go to the army, we get responsibilities, we command, we do many, many things that make us who we are, and why Israel is so successful with startups, and many other things. Here it's so different, but this is why we have, I think, some kind of advantage here. We really try to educate and try to change their mindset and support them, and we encourage them to be in, I would say, an accelerator like ours, because they're surrounded by people that support them and try to help them and advise them. Also, we can always advise what to tell your parents, what to tell your friends. There's no magic here, but you can always, help build their confidence in what they're doing or trying to do.
Yeah, there's a Jim Rohn quote. Jim Rohn, the author, said that you are the sum of the 5 people that you hang around with on a daily basis. And you think how important that is if you're a startup founder, if you're surrounded by people who don't get what it means to be an entrepreneur and people who have safe jobs. If they don't understand, if their attitude is, why risk it? Why take a chance? Stay safe, do the corporate thing. Even if you disagree, you end up becoming like them because you don't want to be outside the group, So, especially in Asia, how powerful that peer pressure is. People want to fit in. So that pressure on entrepreneurs must be very strong. And there's a personal issue there as well, which is often untalked about. It's the partners. So how important it is to have a supportive partner when you start a business, even if they're not an entrepreneur, like you said with your husband, how important it is for them to support you rather than people who, I'm not sure you should be doing this, because ultimately that's going to end in failure, right? So yes. I think that's a big challenge, especially here in Asia. Okay, so let's talk about the growth of Singapore Dine. So you're at this stage where you're growing the business. Mm-hmm. And you said you ran that business for 6 years. Can you tell us a little bit about how that growth went from the moment you sort of, you committed to it full time, the second time round, and you grew that? Was it a linear path? Was it something that you had a lot of control in, or was it just go crazy?
No, it was, I had control, but it was crazy. There were ups and downs, of course, and the F&B industry in Singapore is very shaky. Restaurants open and close. So, you have a delivery from one restaurant, then suddenly it closes up, and it was crazy. And I would say the beginning, because there was no food delivery before us here in Singapore. There was only Pizza Hut and McDonald's. Even Domino's Pizza was not in Singapore yet. So it was something very new for the restaurant owners. So they didn't really know how to deal with it. So it was very, very challenging. But of course, when we started, this whole online thing was just started. So we started with handing out booklets with the menus 9 years ago. It was 8 years ago, sorry. Very, very new. And then this online thing started, and we started to have online deliveries. And it was very new. So people were like, wow, okay, this is an interesting thing. It's very easy. So it was, then we scaled up very nicely with the online. And then Food Panda came to town
right.
after a few years.
Let's talk about that in a minute, just so we understand. Were you weren't actually delivering your own food, you were delivering other restaurants' food, or not?
Yeah, no. With very regular delivery. You get an order from X restaurant, you pick up, the rider goes, picks up the food. But of course, as being the owner, I found myself so many evenings, no riders, because somehow, they just didn't show up. And I had to do deliveries by myself.
You had to cover. Right.
Yes, and I don't have a motorbike, so I took a taxi, went to the restaurant, and then went to deliver. And I must say that I did get nice tips. It's not common in Singapore to get tips, but I got some, so I was happy.
But did you learn a lot about the business by doing that? Because yes. I can imagine some founders are thinking, hey, look, I've done an MBA. I didn't do an MBA to become a food delivery guy, right? It's not my job. People have that kind of maybe a little bit of an attitude.
Ego.
Right.
Yes.
Ego's the word, right? But I think you're completely doing the right thing. You're not only making sure the business works, but you're getting a really frontline, on the floor view of what's going on and talking to customers.
Yes. So first of all, yes. And I'm a very egoless person. I don't have ego, and I always say that you always have to make your hands dirty in order to understand. And I love the show that there's this reality show of the boss that he, like the owner of the airline, and then he works with the people, but they don't know that it's him to better understand.
Right?
Yeah, so to better understand what's going on. And I feel that's what makes it's successful, that you really understand everything from the writer, from the restaurant. So I was with restaurants and I understood what's going on, how they get the order, what to change. That's the only way that you can succeed. Having your degrees and papers, it doesn't help a lot.
Right.
You really need to make your hands dirty in everything, even creating the Excel files with the numbers, everything. So what if I have an MA? So what?
Exactly.
It doesn't make me,
Especially in that type of business where it's so much about people, isn't it? It's experience that people buy. That, when you turn up or when your rider turns up and delivers the food, if they're miserable, that can affect everything. Doesn't matter how much money you spend on marketing or branding. If the last person to touch the customer has an attitude, then you've lost all that marketing investment in the brand and so on. But, if that person loves people and works well with people, that can go a long way. And you talk about the airline as a great example. And I think about, like air stewards, how important it is for them, in terms of their personality. And, they are the brand effectively, not the billions they invest in these big ad campaigns, right? It's there's people out there.
Exactly.
Did you get any kind of insight when you were doing that? I mean, any sort of stories or moments where you thought, aha, when you were actually out doing that you sort of saw things maybe that you wouldn't have seen if you sat behind the computer screen?
I can write a book and it will be a bestseller of my experience running a food delivery company in Singapore. Crazy stories. But
Go on, give us a few then. We want to know, because we want to know what it was actually like.
So that's something very funny that I always tell. At the beginning, you have the riders and they need to pick up the food and deliver to the customer. And one time a rider just, 3-4 hours, no one heard about, we don't know where he is. And, we checked, maybe an accident, nothing. What happened? He was hungry. So he stopped along the way to eat the food he was supposed to deliver and just disappeared.
Wow.
So, at that point you're like, what? Like how, what did you think? But a lot of stories and, of course, customers that call and scream because the hamburger is like this and then, but you ordered that. Yes, but you had to know that. And the times that I was sued by my employees and I went to the MOM, the Ministry of Manpower here. Of course, I always won, but they sue you for everything. They try because you're dealing with very, I would say, different people than you used to. It's very hardworking people, and they try. So
right, and it's easy to have that them and us mindset, isn't it, in that kind of business? Because as you say, they come from a different background, and they've probably done delivery jobs for other companies, whether it's food or logistics or whatever.
Yeah, and suddenly they get a woman that's telling them what to do and telling, men drivers what to do and be on time. And, I was very harsh and I don't think they liked it. And for them it was, but some people appreciated it very much.
Well, they didn't like it because you're a woman telling them what to do?
Of course. You're the woman, you tell someone what to do. Not a lot of people like that.
Did that bother you? Did that get to you?
No, I'm like I said, I'm egoless, and when I have a goal and I have something, I don't care. I was very,
Interesting. That's fascinating. So, I mean, that must have been a valuable experience for you. But, I imagine as well, it must be extremely different to what you were used to when you were working in pharmaceuticals, right?
Yes.
It's a world,
yes,
it's
I was,
complete opposite, no?
Yeah, I was a manager. I was, doing other things, totally different things. And here I'm dealing with drivers and dealing with people that I would never dreamt of dealing with and customers that are screaming at me. But it's rewarding eventually. But it was a journey. Everything I learned, I always say everything I learned in life, I learned in the 6 years of running a food delivery company. Even I had, the website, so I had to, I was the one that did all the changes and everything. And so many, many things that I learned during running a food delivery company in Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, inspiring as well. That you said it was rewarding eventually. We'll talk about, what happened at the end in that story, because I think listeners would be fascinating to know where that goes. One of the things that I hear a lot, and I don't think it's talked about a lot as well openly, is with founders, entrepreneurs especially, is doubt. It's never easy. Starting a business is never easy, and you've got to have a lot of self-belief, but you're not a robot. You're a human being, and you're going to have doubts at some stage. Was there at a point, when you're talking about the kind of stories that you're talking about, like the delivery driver disappears and he's eating the pizza that should be delivered to, one of your best customers, all those kind of stories, and you get frustrated. Was there ever a time when you were doing that and you thought back, I came from this managerial background, I had a comfortable job, I'm doing this, and did you ever think, why the hell am I doing this?
Every morning, of course. Every morning you wake up and say, why do I need this? Why do I need this?
Right.
What was I thinking to myself? Yes. But it's yours. It's mine. I built it with my own 10 fingers, with my own 2 hands. And I was very proud. And you have these fun things that you're invited to restaurant openings, and when the drivers, they're very nice. So you have rewards along the way. And of course, up until today, with running an accelerator, sometimes I wake up in the morning and say, why do I need this? Why do I need this? But it's mine, and I built it, and I'm very proud. And you asked about building things. You say to start is difficult. I think starting, or at least from my point of view, starting is the easy part. Starting is the fun part. It's new. You're very excited. The goal is to maintain it and not, I would say, give up, because starting is the fun part. That's the easiest. Then after a few months or a year, then, okay, now what? And then you have to sometimes change your direction or find different things to do for revenue or whatever. But that's the hard part, to maintain and to continue and not give up. And I see a lot of even my friends that start something, but after a few months, it's too difficult, so they give up and they try something else. But the idea is to focus and finish what you started.
Very true. As a marathon runner, I'm sure you appreciate that the hardest part is the middle part, right? It's not when you started, you're full of enthusiasm, and you don't give up on mile 26, do you? I mean, nobody gives up with the finish line in sight. So it's the middle part that's the hardest. So let's talk about the entrance of Food Panda. I mean, anybody in Asia will know of Food Panda, and anyone in the tech scene will know of them. So was that always part of the plan, to exit by being acquired by something like Food Panda?
No, never thought about it. I also, along the way, before they came, Food Panda, or just at the beginning when they came to Singapore, I was offered a few times by various people to buy Singapore Dine, but I always said no. I didn't feel it's time. I wasn't ready emotionally. It was my baby. My 3rd child, and I wasn't ready to sell it yet, although I had, all these good days, bad days, and it's very challenging. Running a food delivery is not easy. But I wasn't ready. And then Food Panda came, and I was very scared for a few months, because they're Food Panda, Rocket Internet. They have all this money, and they were pumping marketing here in Singapore like crazy, giving out vouchers and all these discounts, and really everybody knew about Food Panda, but I didn't feel that anything is really happening in terms of competition. So, okay, we were 2 companies working, everybody's doing their own things. And then one day, I got a call from their manager here in Singapore, and he wanted to meet. So, of course, we met. A very, very nice guy. We had a very, very good chemistry. And he said, listen, we have all this marketing money. We're very good at marketing and IT, but we have no idea, and we're not succeeding in delivering from point A to point B. Singapore is different. And I knew what he was talking about, because Singapore is different, although it's a small country. It's hard in terms of the manpower and other things. And after a few discussions, we decided to partner. We were doing all the operation and logistics for Food Panda, and they were keeping on the name and the marketing. And then I was more, I would say, I grew up with myself, and I understood that I was ready maybe to sell the company. And I thought that that could be a very good direction, and worked very hard that things will work very good between us. And after, I think, about a year and a half of working together, they offered to acquire us. And then we had a few discussions, and it was very fast because they knew us. So it was pretty easy.
Right. But they had partnered with you for quite some time before they acquired you, right? So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So this was towards the end of 2015, is that right? So you were 5 years into your business.
2015, yeah, something like that, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's been in the press. It's undisclosed financial terms. I'm not going to ask you about that. I just want to know, I mean, at that point when they acquired you, was it enough that you could basically say, right, this is it, I don't need to work again?
Nah, never. Even if I get $100 million, I would never say that.
Why?
I like working. I like being busy. I don't like. I like to have a lot of things on my plate.
Right, you get bored pretty fast, right?
Yeah, I get bored very fast. I always need to think of what to do next, and that's just a personality. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So when the acquisition had gone through and everything was signed and you were done and you had walked away, you had successfully built this business and Food Panda had acquired this business, and now effectively you were free.
No, I wasn't, because in parallel, before I already worked on the new project on the application for the Apple Watch, the dating application for the Apple Watch.
We haven't even talked about that.
I already had that in I would say, like, hot plate. So.
Exactly. So, okay. Well, I mean, that's the subject for another conversation. We've covered, only half your story really today. I feel there's so much to do. So please come back on it at some point in the future and share with us an update, because I think that, your story as well. I mean, we talked about Impact Tech with Yoav yesterday, but your story, I think there's a lot more to be written. It sounds like, there are more projects on the horizon which will come up in your story, which would love you to come back onto the show and share with us. But it's fascinating, I mean, what you've done with Singapore Dine and what you've achieved and the challenges that you've faced. That story, I think, is inspiring for people listening. Maybe they're sort of earlier in that stage, in that journey. Maybe somebody's working in a pharmaceutical company, looking out the window, thinking, maybe I can do this, right? I mean, is there any, I know it's so different and each of them is individual, but, because you work in an accelerator, I'm sure you see patterns of entrepreneurs and people ask you for help all the time. Is there any kind of advice that you could offer somebody who's thinking, like, looking at your story and thinking, I want to do something like that? So even advice to a younger Kineret, let's go back 10 years, starting in that journey. Is there anything you would have done differently? I know you would still make the mistakes you made because that's part of your learning process, as you said. But is there anything you would do differently to speed it up or make those mistakes less costly? First
of all, no, I wouldn't. I always say I always look back and I wouldn't change anything, because from everything you learn, so from all the mistakes, for all the journey, I wouldn't change anything. Everything is now, of course, now I look back and say it's perfect, but along the way you have all these obstacles, and but I wouldn't change anything. Everything that bad that went taught me something, and everything good taught me something. So, and everything sort of is like a puzzle. And what happened, and it brought me to where I am today. And this is why I do what I do today, because it's, you say inspiring and everything. So I try to inspire the startups, and with my personal story, with my personal journey, this is why Impact Tech sort of happened. So we can empower these young startups and help them and make them understand that they can make mistakes and they can have bad days, but still the horizon is there and the light is there. And if you just believe in yourself, you can do anything, really. And of course, it takes time. And we don't have a lot of these Facebook or Snapchat or Airbnb or Dropbox, but we have other successes. And I think, again, coming from the background that I came and where I grew up and going through the army and all these things in Israel makes you look at things a bit different, and it helps. So we try to help others that don't have it.
Well, Kineret, you certainly have inspired today. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fascinating and inspiration. And I'm sure people want to reach out and connect with you. So before you go, please share with us some link or some place that people can go and find out a bit more about you and your story.
I assume my LinkedIn, but just if someone wants to contact me, go to my website of Impact Tech, which is www.impacttech.co. And under info or whatever, they can just reach me. And my name, Kineret Karin, there's only one like this. And yeah.
Great. Excellent. We'll put all the details in the show notes, Kineret. Fantastic that you came on the show. Please come back on at some point in the future and update us if you have more to share in your story. That's Kineret Karin, everybody. She's the co-founder of Impact Tech. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. All the details in the show notes. And yes, part 2 coming right up.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at www.asiatechpodcast.com.